So we've been told that all of this is about we have to save the country by reducing the deficit. So here is Elon. He talked quite a lot about this, about how this is what it was all about with Doge, man. They're doing it for America. They're doing it to save America because these deficits are bad for everybody.
To people that this is a very important point. If we don't solve the deficit, there won't be money for medical care. There won't be money for Social Security. We either solve the deficit, or all we'll be doing is paying debt.
Nobody's
and so it's got to be solved, or there's no medical care, there's no Social Security, there's no nothing. It's got to be solved. It's not optional. America will go bankrupt if this is not done. That's why I'm here.
That's why he's here, man. He's doing it for you, you know. All this I did for thee, all that. But hey, I haven't seen him suggest higher taxes on people like himself, right? He's such a patriot. Well, you know, we need to really not renew those Trump tax cuts because these deficits are out of. He doesn't say that, right? Well, you know who did say this math isn't mathing? The bond market. The Republican spending bill is sending yields soaring and creating a major market headache. Here's a tweet about this. They spiked over 5%, which for the uninitiated, that is very, very high. That's very unusually high. Bond rates for the 30 year have not been over 5% since about the turn of the 21st century, not consistently. If you are wondering why stocks just all went down at once, and they did, like mid-afternoon, all of a sudden the market went down. We just had a horrible bond auction in the United States for our 20-year treasuries. Because of the lack of bidders, it caused the 20-year bond yield to surge to 5.1. Credit market is screaming for help right now. So understand, it's pretty simple. If you're higher risk, you pay higher interest, right? Because you have to give a higher interest rate to entice people to want to take on your debt. Once the bond market got a look at what this bill was going to do in terms of the deficit, nobody wanted to buy the treasuries and it spiked the interest rates. Now that affects you in terms of credit card rates, mortgage rates. The credit markets are going to take their cues off of this. It's unlike a lot of what goes on in Wall Street. It's not just between the degenerate gamblers. This actually affects you. Thomas Massey commented on this tweet. Here's a sign of what's in store if the big, beautiful bill passes. Congress can do fantasy math, but when investors put money on the line, the math gets real. Bond markets are already demanding higher returns because Congress isn't serious. The Fed no longer controls rates. In other words, the whole market holds its breath every time Jerome Powell announces, the chairman of the Fed, what he's going to do in terms of lowering or raising interest rates. That's a way of controlling what you pay for mortgages. And it's a crude instrument that is used to cool demand if inflation is high. That's why we've had high interest rates for several years. That's been his way of trying to cool business activity in order to bring down inflation. What Massey is saying here is, well, if the bond market is going to do this, it doesn't matter what Powell thinks. The interest rates are going to take their cues off the bond rates. So here is a little montage of Republicans trying to put a good face on the fact that they're adding trillions of dollars to this deficit that they claim to care so much about.
Could add to the deficit trillions.
It's going to. Absolutely. It's not as good as I want it to be. But if the Democrats took control of the bill, it would be even bigger and more spending.
Critics on the conservative side are saying that this is too much, that it's going to blow up the price tag of this bill.
It doesn't. We worked within the framework with the Speaker and the White House and came to an agreement, again, to provide tax relief to middle-class families.
And that last comment came from Congressman Mike Lawler, who had been negotiating a deal with the Speaker for days as part of a bloc of members, largely from New York and the Northeast, who wanted to increase the amount that taxpayers can deduct over the state and local taxes that they paid. That caused a lot of pushback from the right flank of the party, worried that would blow up the price tag of this bill. They called it a subsidy for those blue state lawmakers. But because of the deal that Johnson cut with the members on the more moderate side, those moderates are now on board behind this plan. The question now is, can he get the right flank concerned about the price tag? That's what this meeting at the White House is about this afternoon, guys.
All right. So, spoiler alert, as part of their 42 pages of amendments, they increased the salt tax to 40,000, the salt tax deduction, which primarily benefits the very rich. You know how much money you have to be making to have a $40,000 state and local tax bill?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I live in New York, one of these high tax states they're talking about. I think my state and local is usually like a few hundred.
Yeah.
You know how much money
Exactly,
you
yeah.
have to make for 10,000 deduction to be too low?
Oh,
And
the
again,
multimillionaire.
this is how greedy these people are. That this would be an issue. You literally have money to burn. What can you not afford? You can't put an extra engine in your yacht because of this? Like, what
Right.
are we talking about here? To destroy the entire social safety net so that you can do things like this and destroy the economy by spiking interest rates with a bill that doesn't even do what you claim you're doing this for.
Right.
In order just to maintain these tax cuts. Like, look, if they went in and they got rid of the Trump tax cuts and raised taxes on the rich and reduced the salt tax, and they were cutting social programs, you could say, I don't agree with them. They're making an honest effort to lower the deficit. They actually care about that. That's a smokescreen. These people are such rapacious, greedy criminals. They are doing all this to steal more money for themselves. That's all this is about. Not even about the deficit. Amazing. So, little from CNBC. So, Moody's was the last credit rating agency that had not lowered the US's credit rating, and they finally did this week. Quote, Moody's didn't tell us anything we didn't already know, but they did underscore that things aren't going in the right direction, said Kathy Jones, chief fixed income strategist at Charles Schwab. The big, beautiful bill also, when it comes to debt and deficits, is not going in the right direction. I'm just going to say again, you should really be embarrassed to be in a country where your Congress is debating something called the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah.
If you're not embarrassed, you're not paying attention. This country has become quite well regarded, we'll say. It's become quite regarded. The result, Jones said, is that the U.S. is likely to add to its $36.2 trillion debt load, of which $28.9 trillion is directly held by the public. Tax cuts that aren't matched with less spending would also pressure the budget deficit, which is heading towards 7% of gross domestic product. Now, normal range from what I've seen of advanced industrial economies running debt in the modern era, it's like 1% to 3%. It's kind of normal. 7%, I'm not going to say it's never happened. I'm not an economist, but it's odd. I've never seen a country that had a debt to GDP ratio like that. With the deficit heading to 6.5 to 7% of GDP, that is inconsistent with debt to GDP stability over the long run, Matthew Luzetti, chief U.S. economist at Deutsche Bank, said in a client note. Absent a clearer commitment towards putting deficits on a downward path, investor concerns about U.S. fiscal dynamics are likely to persist. How much the budget will get stretched is dependent on the final package that gets through Congress. But markets are betting that making the 2017 tax cuts permanent, as well as eliminating taxes on tips and overtime with only partial revenue offsets, will aggravate the fiscal problems. If the bill fails, the financial markets won't be happy. But if it passes, Well, that might be just as problematic, wrote Ed Yardeni, head of Yardeni Research. Probably Yardeni. Why? Because budget deficits matter. That's especially so when they lead to higher interest rates, higher bond yields, and potentially higher inflation. We suspect the bond vigilantes already anticipate this. This is traders who specialize in bonds. And what is that all being done in service to? Once again, we've shown this chart before. 68% of the proposed Trump tax cuts in this bill go to the top 68% of the country, of income earners. And 17% of it goes to the next 20%. The amount that goes to the bottom 60% of society, 15% of those tax cuts go to the bottom 60%. 1% go to the poorest 20%. All of this, none of it is about deficit reduction. None of it is about putting on your big boy pants and taking financial responsibility. None of it is about running the country like a business. We can't run these deficits. It's all a smokescreen. It's all a smokescreen. This is about making you truly a peasant. This is really about establishing once and for all a feudal order in this country where the vast majority of people are struggling, starving, impoverished, sick, desperate, and disempowered. That's the key. Disempowered. They are using this bill to establish a feudal system where almost all of the wealth in the country goes to a very small ruling class who keep you distracted fighting about statues and South Africa and bathroom laws. They're going to keep you all fighting about that, thinking you belong to something by aligning with this or that, while they're robbing you blind and your condition gets increasingly desperate. But by the time people get together and say, hey, we got to fight these people, it's going to be too late. They're going to have AI surveillance. I almost did a story this week about how New Orleans, of all places, I don't know how they finance this. It just came out because the Washington Post filed Freedom of Information Acts. They were surveilling the public with Face ID, first city to ever do it. They didn't tell anybody about that. By the time people unite against them, you're gonna be living in a surveillance state where you're not going to be able to sneeze without them knowing about it. That's what this bill is about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's fairly transparent, and you always have to ask yourself, at what point does the dam break? At what point do people realize this? It's amazing. It's amazing how the framing of the conversation is so skewed in one direction. Speaking of the last part of this, how you're even talking about qualifications for Medicaid, how you're even having a conversation about who does and doesn't deserve medicine is indicative of just how firmly on your neck they already have their boot. And then once they have you there, then you create a debate around a relatively minor issue relative to the big picture, which is the orientation, the economic orientation of the society. That's why there's that phrase there. I forget who wrote it. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, right? Because the further you zoom out, the dumber this argument is to begin with. There should be no debate about really any of this. But here you are. And we'll see what happens with this bill in the Senate. There are going to be some hurdles there, but they were able to clear this through the House by charming who? The blue states, purple district moderates with that SALT tax, which, I mean, if that doesn't tell you everything, I don't know what does. Who owes $40,000 in state and local taxes?
Right.
That tells you who it's for. That's where they had to pull out all the stops to get the people representing those constituencies on board. The people representing the poorest districts in the country weren't consulted about this. Hey, what do you think about throwing people off of Medicaid? They don't care.
Right. Yeah. Of course not. Of course not. And the fact that originally they wanted this to kick in 2029, so they'd be past even the presidential elections.
Right. Exactly.
they were able to pressure them into doing it 2026, which will be right in the midterms and before the presidential elections. I guess they're figuring they'll be able to gin up enough BS about white genocide in South Africa to get their chuds to come out for them again. They're just going to roll the dice and chance it. They feel like they've got this rare opportunity to completely destroy the lives of the working and middle class, and they're not going to pass that up.
No, they are not. That is true. Hey, thanks for watching our video. We're currently raising money to produce our documentary film on the Uhuru movement. Go to givesendgo.com/do dissidents to chip in.
Every dollar you give goes towards the project. We do not take any kind of salary on these. We mostly live on Gatorade when we're on the road, so even solid food is iffy, just enough to get by. But we do not take any pay for this. Every dollar actually goes into what we need to shoot the project. The Uhuru movement is a subject that really deserves more exposure. Everybody heard about it through the court case, and that was an important thing to elevate. But they've done incredible community work demonstrating a different way that is socialist and not dependent on the government at the same time, which a lot of people don't even realize that still exists in the tradition of the Black Panther food and education programs. And to show there is such a strong community like that with such strong leadership is really important, particularly at this historical moment.
Yeah, so we're really excited about doing the project, but we need your help. So go to givesendgo.com/do dissidents to chip in. Thanks very much for your support.
Please clap.